England, 1822. It was an established opinion in London society that Duke Benedict, at the age of 8 and 20, was in possession of everything a man could desire. What was less understood was that the Duke himself considered his life to be entirely devoid of a single thing he truly wanted. He stood by the tall library window of his London mansion, gazing without interest at the manicured square below. The room was a masterpiece of somber elegance, rich mahogany, deep navy blues, and charcoal greys. It was a world devoid of primary colour, and most especially of black. "She is the daughter of the Earl of Ashworth," said a voice from behind him. "Her dowry is considerable, her connections are impeccable, and she is said to have a great appreciation for art." Benedict did not turn. "Benjamin, does she have an opinion of her own? Or is it merely the opinion of her father, repeated with more elegant phrasing?" His friend Benjamin, a warm and sensible man of 32, sighed from his position near the desk. "I am merely reading the list, Benedict. You are the one who declared a sudden, unyielding desire for a wife this season." "I declared a desire for a partner," Benedict corrected, finally turning. "Not a decorative vase who can recite the names of Italian painters. These women, their mothers present them to me with a list of my own interests, as if I am a prize to be won by mimicry. I am weary of it. I am weary of women who profess a sudden love for my favorite horse or my political leanings." He gestured to the list in Benjamin's hand. "I would wager £1,000 that not one of them could offer a thought that would genuinely surprise me." Benjamin gave a wry smile. "Then perhaps you are looking for the wrong qualities. What of Lady Annalise? Famed for her beauty." Benedict's expression was dismissive. "Beauty is the most common currency in this city. I find it holds very little value." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of deep frustration. "There is a hollowness to it all. A performance. I wish to meet a woman, not an actress playing a part." He paused, his gaze drifting to a dark marble bust in the corner. "Just ensure none of them are presented to me in black. I find the colour absolute. Avoid. I have no room for such bleakness in my life." Meanwhile, in the quiet countryside of Hertfordshire, Drusilla Dorcas was about to learn the true meaning of bleakness herself. She stood in her bedchamber, a room that, like the rest of the house, was furnished with more ambition than taste. Her family, headed by her father, Sir Alister Dorcas, was a study in social climbing, a wealthy merchant's family desperate to be mistaken for old aristocracy. It was a secret, however, whispered only between Sir Alister and his wife, that the funds to support such a performance were rapidly dwindling. Drusilla, at 24, was a creature of quiet resilience, a vibrant soul trapped in a gilded cage. But at this moment, she felt a flicker of pure, unadulterated joy. She had just discovered a locked trunk in the attic, and inside, a treasure. The gowns of the mother she barely remembered. She pulled one out, a gown of luminous, joyful pink, her own favourite colour, a fact she cherished as a secret connection to the woman she'd lost at the age of 10. Slipping it on, the silk felt like a whisper from the past. It fit as though made for her. She spun before the mirror, the skirt flaring around her, and for a glorious instant she was not the daughter of a tormented, angry man. She was free. The door opened. Sir Alister stood there, his face a mask of pleasantry that froze the moment he saw her. The colour drained from his cheeks, replaced by a dark, mottled red. "What?" he said, his voice a low tremor that was far more terrifying than a shout. "Is the meaning of this?" Drusilla stopped spinning, her joy evaporating. "Father, I only just found them." It was Mother's. "I can see whose it was," he hissed, stepping into the room. His eyes raked over her, but he did not see his daughter. He saw a ghost. "That is the very gown she wore to the Harrington ball. The night she held court with the Viscount until dawn, smiling into his eyes. You have her face, her hair, and now you have her vanity." "That is not true," Drusilla's spirit, the one her father was so determined to crush, flared to life. I only wanted to feel close to her. "You will feel the back of my hand if you do not take it off this instant," he roared, his control finally snapping. "You are as stubborn as she was. You will burn it. You will burn all of them." Lady Rhoda, Drusilla's kind but timid stepmother, rushed in, drawn by the shouting. "My dear, what is it?" "Drusilla. She will not be attending the ball." Sir Alistair spat, his furious gaze still locked on his daughter. "I will not have her parading about, turning the heads of men, reminding everyone of the woman who brought shame to my name." "Sir Alistair, you cannot," Lady Rhoda pleaded, her voice trembling. "Her absence will cause more gossip than her presence ever could. What will people say?" Her father considered this, his cruel mind twisting the plea into a new form of punishment. A slow, terrible smile spread across his face. "Very well, she will attend. But she will not go as a jewel. She will go as a shadow." He turned to his wife. "You will have a gown made for her. From the plainest black wool, no lace, no ribbon. Make it voluminous, ill-fitting. She wishes to be seen? Then let society see her shame." Back in London, the very same assembly ball was being discussed, though with far less enthusiasm. "You cannot be serious about avoiding it," Lady Naomi said, her tone light but firm. She was a sharp, intelligent woman who, along with her husband Benjamin, constituted the entirety of Duke Benedict's close circle of friends. "I am entirely serious," Benedict replied from across the drawing room. "It will be precisely the same as every other ball. I will be forced to dance with women who tremble when I speak and agree with every word I say. It is an exercise in futility. It is an exercise in duty." Benjamin countered. "People expect to see you. Besides," he added with a sly grin, "the country offers a different sort of vintage. Perhaps you will find a woman there who has not yet learned to worship your every move." Naomi laughed. "Oh, they learn quickly enough. Benedict, the moment you walk through those doors, they will swoop down like vultures. Don't you ever grow tired of it?" "It is the single most tiresome aspect of my existence," Benedict admitted. "But it is a life I cannot escape." "Then you may as well have a good dance while you endure it," Naomi insisted. "We are going, and you are coming with us. There is no more to be said on the matter." Benedict looked between the two of them, his oldest friend and his brilliant wife, and found his resolve failing. "Very well," he sighed in mock defeat. "But if I am forced to discuss crop rotation with another debutante whose father has coached her on my agricultural theories, I am holding you both personally responsible." The black dress was even worse than Drusilla had imagined. It was heavy, shapeless, and absorbed all the light in the room, a void of colour and joy. Her two younger stepsisters, Rachel and Bertha, fussed around her, their bright, youthful faces etched with concern. At 19, they were a merry, inseparable pair who adored Drusilla and despised their father's cruelty towards her. "Perhaps if we added Mother's pearl brooch," Rachel suggested, holding up the delicate pin. "Father would see it and rip it from the fabric," Drusilla said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. She was determined not to cry in front of them. "Do not worry. It is only a dress. He cannot take my spirit." "He tries so very hard," Bertha muttered, pulling at the bulky sleeves. "It is monstrously unfair. You are the most beautiful of all of us, and he insists on hiding you." Drusilla managed a small, sad smile. "Then tonight, I shall be a mysterious shadow. I will watch you both dance with handsome men and live vicariously. Now stop looking so glum. This is your first grand ball. We are going to have fun, no matter what I am wearing. That will be our revenge." The sisters exchanged a look of profound love for her. They knew her bravery was a performance for their sake, a shield to protect their happiness from their father's darkness. As they descended the grand staircase to the waiting carriage, Drusilla took a deep breath. She was not going to the ball to find a husband or to please society. She was going as an act of defiance, a silent declaration that even in a dress made of shame, she would not be broken. The ballroom was a galaxy of color and light. Jewels glittered, silks rustled, and the air buzzed with music and ambition. Duke Benedict, having finally extricated himself from a suffocating conversation with a particularly determined matchmaking mother, had retreated to the relative quiet of a marble pillar near the edge of the dance floor. He signaled for a glass of champagne, his polite smile finally falling away to reveal a deep, profound boredom. It was from this vantage point that he saw her. Across the small expanse of polished floor, amidst a sea of pastel silks and vibrant satins, stood a woman in stark, unadorned black. The dress was a monstrosity, a shapeless void of color, yet it failed completely to hide the exquisite beauty of her features, and in it she was the most captivating creature he had ever seen. But it was her spirit that truly held him fast. She was not looking at him. She was laughing, her head tilted towards two younger girls, and the genuine joy on her face was a beacon in the stuffy, performative room. It was then that the small drama unfolded, not 10 feet from where he stood. A clumsy young lord, trying to gain the attention of one of the younger girls, stumbled backwards, spilling a glass of champagne down her front. He offered a hasty, insincere apology. "A gentleman of your considerable size must find it a terrible challenge to navigate a ballroom," came a voice, clear and laced with ice. It was the woman in black. "Perhaps you ought to practice with the furniture first, before attempting to approach ladies." Benedict froze, the champagne glass halfway to his lips. The words were sharp, intelligent, and utterly authentic. He felt a pull so immediate, so powerful it stole the air from his lungs. This was not an actress. This was a real person. He caught Benjamin's eye across the crowd and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Benjamin, understanding his friend perfectly, excused himself from his own conversation and moved to the Duke's side. "The lady in black," Benedict murmured, his voice an urgent command, never taking his eyes off her. "Who is she?" Benjamin followed his gaze. "That is a Miss Dorcas," he said quietly, having made it his business to know the local families. "Her father is Sir Alistair Dorcas, a merchant of some wealth." Benedict barely heard the rest. Miss Dorcas. The name settled in his mind, a piece of a puzzle he suddenly needed to solve. The room seemed to fade away. The music, the chatter, the sea of fawning faces, it all vanished. There was only the woman in the black dress. The one color he despised, now worn by the only person in the room he desperately needed to meet. Forgetting his friends, forgetting his title, forgetting everything, he began to walk. A hush rippled through the crowd as they watched their Duke cross the floor, bypassing the most beautiful and well-connected ladies of the season. He stopped before the woman in black, the one they all thought was a servant or a disgraced relation, and he bowed. "Forgive my intrusion," he said, his voice a low vibration that only she could hear over her own pounding heart. "I find myself in need of a dance partner with a far more interesting view of the world than I have so far encountered this evening." He looked up, and for the first time, she met his gaze. His eyes held hers as the entire world watched. "Miss Dorcas," Duke Benedict said, "would you do me the honor?" And in the deafening silence that followed, as her father watched with thunderous fury and her sisters with breathless awe, Drusilla Dorcas had to decide whether to take the hand of the one man who could be her salvation, or her ultimate ruin. For a paralyzing moment, the world consisted only of the deafening silence in the ballroom and the outstretched hand of Duke Benedict. Drusilla felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, but the most powerful were those of her father, whose fury burned like a physical force from across the room. To accept was an act of open rebellion, a declaration of self-worth she had never been permitted to make. To refuse was to retreat back into the shadows he had designed for her. She looked at the Duke. His expression was not one of pity, but of genuine, unwavering interest. In his eyes, she was not a shadow. She was a woman. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said, her voice clearer and stronger than she expected. She placed her trembling hand in his. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly as he led her to the dance floor. It was a waltz, an intimate dance that signaled a level of interest far beyond mere politeness. As he drew her into the frame, his hand resting gently but firmly on her waist, she was acutely aware of the stark contrast between his impeccably tailored evening clothes and her own shapeless black wool. "I must confess, Miss Dorcas," Benedict began, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "I have been observing you this evening. You seem to be the only person in this entire room who is genuinely enjoying herself." Drusilla's sharp tongue, her trusted shield, came to her defense. "Perhaps that is because I am the only person here with nothing to gain, Your Grace." "It is remarkably freeing." A slow smile touched his lips. He had expected deference. He was met with wit. "And yet you speak as though freedom is a novelty to you." His perception was so astute it startled her. "For a woman, freedom is always a novelty," she replied, her gaze steady. "It is a currency we are rarely permitted to hold." "Then you must be a very wealthy woman indeed," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "For you wield your opinions with the confidence of a queen." "Opinions are all the dowry I possess, Your Grace," she retorted, a ghost of a smile playing on her own lips. "I must spend them wisely." He laughed then, a genuine warm sound that seemed to silence the whispers around them. He was utterly enchanted. This was no performance. This was real. He studied her face, the exquisite beauty her father's cruelty could not hide. But it was the intelligence in her amber eyes that held him captive. He saw the flicker of sadness beneath the surface, the resilience that held her straight and tall in a dress designed to make her slump in shame. "Then allow me to be your first investment," he murmured as the music drew to a close. "For I find your currency far more valuable than any other in this room." He bowed, pressing a light, fleeting kiss to her gloved knuckles before escorting her from the floor. The moment the Duke released her, Drusilla felt as though a spell had been broken. She retreated immediately to the safety of her sisters, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Drusilla!" Rachel whispered, her eyes wide as saucers. "You danced with the Duke." "The actual Duke." "What did he say?" Bertha demanded, clutching her arm. "He was smiling." "I have never seen a man look so completely captivated." "He said very little of consequence," Drusilla lied, fanning her flushed cheeks. "It was merely one dance. An act of pity for the girl in the ghastly dress, I imagine." But she could not fool her sisters, nor could she fool herself. It had not felt like pity. It had felt like recognition. From across the room, Lady Rhoda watched with a heart torn between terror and triumphant calculation. Her husband's face was a thundercloud, promising a storm of epic proportions. But the Duke had not taken his eyes off Drusilla, even as he was now surrounded by a flock of hopeful mothers and their dazzling daughters. This was the opening she had been praying for, a chance to save her family from ruin, but it had come in the one form she knew her husband would never, ever tolerate. "Well," Lady Naomi said with a grin as Benedict rejoined them, "that was the most interesting thing you have done all season. You cross a ballroom to dance with a mystery in a black dress. Do tell, what did you discover?" "I discovered," Benedict said, his expression thoughtful and serious, "that I have been fishing in the wrong pond entirely." Benjamin clapped him on the shoulder. "She is a Miss Dorcas. Her father is Sir Alistair Dorcas, a merchant of some sort. New money, and from what I hear, not nearly as much of it as he pretends. I do not care if her father is a blacksmith," Benedict stated, his gaze sweeping the room until he found Drusilla again. "She was the only honest person I have spoken to in a year. There is a fire in her, Benjamin. Did you see it?" "We all saw it," Naomi confirmed. "The question is, what do you intend to do about it? An interest in a girl like that, from a family like that, will cause a considerable stir." "Then let it," Benedict replied, a determined set to his jaw. "Let the whole of London stir. I find I am suddenly very interested in the countryside." The carriage ride home was a tomb of suffocating silence. Drusilla sat opposite her father, feeling the heat of his rage, though he did not look at her. The moment the front door of their home closed behind them, the storm broke. "You did that deliberately," Sir Alistair hissed, grabbing her arm. "You made a spectacle of yourself. You invited his attention." "I did nothing of the sort!" Drusilla cried, wrenching her arm away. "I did as you commanded. I wore this dress, I stood in the corner, and I accepted a dance. Is my very existence so offensive to you?" "Your defiance is what is offensive," he roared. "It is her defiance. I see her in you, the same deceitful pride, the same way she would smile at other men, inviting them with her eyes." "Stop it!" Drusilla's voice cracked with a pain that had been building for 14 years. "Stop speaking of her as if she were a monster, and stop looking at me as if I am her ghost." "You are her ghost!" he shouted, his face contorted with a decade of jealousy and grief. "You stood there in that dress her mother wore, looking just like her, and you think I do not see the same poison in you?" "Enough, Alistair," Lady Rhoda finally intervened, stepping between them. "You are speaking of your own daughter." "He has never seen me as his daughter," Drusilla said, tears of fury and heartbreak finally streaming down her face. "He sees only a woman he despised." "I despise deceit," he bellowed. "And you, madam, are the living proof of it." He raised a hand to strike her, but the sight of Rachel and Bertha rushing to flank their sister, their young faces pale with terror and defiance, made him freeze. He looked at the three of them, a united front against him, and something inside him seemed to crumble. With a guttural cry of anguish, he turned and stormed into his library, slamming the door behind him. The three sisters clung to each other, trembling in the aftermath. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Drusilla knew that something had irrevocably broken that night. The next morning, the house was unnervingly quiet, the air thick with unspoken resentments. Drusilla had not slept, her mind replaying the dance, the conversation, and the terrible fight that had followed. She knew her father would never forgive her. Any hope of a connection with the Duke was a fantasy, a fleeting dream that had only served to make her cage feel smaller and colder. She was sitting in the morning room with her sisters, the three of them finding solace in their shared silence, when the family butler, Jennings, entered the room. His face was pale, his expression one of profound shock. He stood stiffly by the door, his eyes fixed on Drusilla. "Miss Dorcas," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "you have a visitor." Before she could question it, a tall figure filled the doorway, blocking out the morning light. Drusilla's heart stopped. It was Duke Benedict. He had come for her. He stood there, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of the sisters before landing on hers. The entire world seemed to shrink to the space between them, a chasm of social impossibility and unspoken questions. He had breached the walls of her prison, and Drusilla had no idea if he had come to set her free or to burn it all to the ground. Drusilla's heart, which had been a frantic drum against her ribs, seemed to stop altogether. The Duke's presence in their morning room was an impossibility, a tear in the very fabric of her constrained reality. Before she could find her voice, or even the breath to form a thought, her sisters, Rachel and Bertha, had risen to their feet, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The butler, Jennings, still looking pale, announced them. His Grace, the Duke of Benedict, to call upon Miss Dorcas. The commotion drew Lady Rhoda from the adjoining room, her hand flying to her throat as she saw the most eligible bachelor in England standing on her threshold. "Your Grace," she stammered, sinking into a deep curtsy. "This is a most unexpected honor." Benedict's gaze remained on Drusilla for a moment longer, before he turned his attention to her stepmother, his expression one of perfect, charming politeness. "Lady Rhoda, forgive my unannounced arrival. I was in the neighborhood and found I could not resist the opportunity to pay my respects after your family's kindness at the ball last evening. At that moment, Sir Alister appeared from the hallway, drawn by the voices. He stopped dead, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. His social ambition, the driving force of his life, was now at war with the jealous rage that consumed him. He could not, in front of his wife and daughters, be seen to insult a duke. "Your Grace," he said. The words clipped, his bow shallow and stiff. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" "Sir Alister," Benedict said smoothly, seemingly oblivious to the palpable tension. "I have long heard rumors of your collection of rare books. As a collector myself, I hoped you might permit me a brief glimpse, and of course to inquire after the health of your charming daughters." His eyes flickered back to Drusilla, leaving no one in any doubt as to his true purpose. Sir Alister was trapped. To deny a duke a request so steeped in civility was a social impossibility. To grant it was to allow this man, this threat, further into his home. "My library is modest," he ground out, "but you are welcome to it." "Excellent," Benedict said with a warm smile that did not reach his eyes. His gaze was once again on Drusilla. Perhaps Miss Dorcas, as a fellow enthusiast of literature, would be so kind as to lead the way. The walk to the library was the longest of Drusiana's life. Her father and stepmother trailed behind them, a silent, menacing pair of chaperones. The air was thick with unspoken things. As they passed a large window overlooking the gardens, Benedict slowed his pace, allowing a few precious feet of distance from their audience. "I confess, Miss Dorcas," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. "My interest in literature is secondary to my interest in its most intelligent advocate. I must ask, has my visit brought you trouble?" Drusiana's heart ached at his perception. He saw too much. To protect herself, and him, she kept her eyes fixed ahead, her reply cool and measured. "Your Grace, trouble is the most consistent guest in this house. You are merely the most distinguished." He was silent for a moment, absorbing the profound sadness in that statement. "Your wit is a formidable shield, Miss Dorcas, but I find myself wondering what it is you are protecting." He paused, his next words softer still. "Forgive my impertinence, but the gown you wore last night, it did not seem a reflection of the spirit of the woman wearing it." She flinched, the memory of her father's rage still fresh. She could not tell him the truth. It was a humiliation too deep, a family wound too raw to expose. "A daughter's duty is to her father's wishes, Your Grace," she said stiffly, the words tasting like ash. "Little more need be said on the matter." "I see," he said, and the simple phrase was laden with an understanding that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. He saw the bars of her cage, even if he did not know who had forged them. They reached the library door, and the moment of privacy was over. The tour of the library was a tense charade, with Sir Alister pointing out volumes with monosyllabic grunts, while Benedict asked polite questions, his eyes constantly seeking out Drusilla, who remained in the corner, a silent, beautiful statue. The Duke's visit was mercifully brief. He departed with a polite bow, promising to call again to continue his literary discussion with Miss Dorcas. The moment the front door closed, the illusion of civility shattered. "How dare you!" Sir Alister rounded on Drusilla, his voice a venomous hiss. "How dare you encourage him? You flaunted yourself. You drew him here with your coy games just as she did." "I did nothing," Drusilla retorted, her fear eclipsed by the sheer injustice of it all. "I spoke barely a word to him." "Your silence speaks volumes," he raged. "He looks at you, and he sees a prize to be won. And you welcome it." "Alister, please," Lady Rhoda begged. "Consider what this could mean. A connection with the Duke could save us." "I would rather be ruined than sell my daughter to a man who looks at her with such possession," he roared, the hypocrisy of his words lost on him. He paced the room like a caged animal, his mind racing for a way to reassert his control. He could not forbid the Duke from calling, but he could ensure the courtship went no further. He stopped, a cruel, calculating light entering his eyes. "Very well," he said, turning to Drusilla. "The Duke wishes to see you. Then he shall see you. But only here, in this house." A cold dread crept over Drusilla. "What do you mean?" "I mean your little excursions are over," he said, a terrible finality in his tone. "You will not ride in the park. You will not walk in the gardens. You will not leave this property. If the Duke wishes to pay his respects, he will do so in this drawing room, with your mother present at all times. You will be a fixture of this house, like the furniture. Is that clear?" It was a life sentence. Her brief, intoxicating dance with freedom was over. The Duke's attention, which had offered a fleeting glimpse of another world, had only resulted in her cage becoming smaller, the locks stronger. With a choked sob, she turned and fled to her room, the sound of her father's triumphant breathing echoing in her ears. The next day passed in a haze of quiet despair. Drusilla remained in her room, the walls feeling closer than ever. Her sisters tried to comfort her, their youthful faces full of a helpless rage, but there was nothing to be said. Her father had won. In the late afternoon, a footman delivered a package to her door. It was a flat, rectangular parcel, wrapped in simple brown paper and addressed to her in a strong, elegant hand. It was from the Duke. Because it was a parcel and not a letter, her father could not easily forbid it. With trembling fingers she unwrapped it. Inside was a slim volume of poetry by Lord Byron. Her heart fluttered as she remembered, touching upon the subject in their brief, stolen conversation. He had remembered. He had listened. As she opened the cover, a small folded note fell out from between the pages. Her breath caught. It was not addressed to her, carrying no name that could incriminate her. It contained only a few lines of script. "Miss Dorcas, you spoke of freedom as a novelty. I find I cannot rest while that is your reality. I will call again tomorrow. Yours, Benedict." She sank onto her bed, clutching the note to her chest as if it were a living thing. The walls of her room no longer felt like a prison, but like a fortress under siege. He saw her. He understood. He was not just a suitor, intrigued by a pretty face. He was an ally, a man who saw her cage and refused to accept it. And as she read his name for the first time, a name he had written for her eyes only, her despair was consumed by a new and far more dangerous emotion: hope. True to his word, Duke Benedict's carriage arrived at precisely 2 o'clock the following afternoon. The sound of its approach sent a tremor of panic and hope through the Dorcas household. Drusilla, who had been commanded to the drawing room by her stepmother, felt as though she were an actress about to step onto a stage for a play she had not rehearsed. Her father, Sir Alistair, was conspicuously absent, having declared some urgent and vague business on the far side of the estate. It was an act of cowardice disguised as a snub. He could not bear to witness the scene, yet he could not forbid it. When Jennings announced the Duke, Benedict entered the room with a calm and easy grace, his presence seeming to shrink the overly ornate furniture. His gaze found Drusilla immediately, a warm and reassuring light in his eyes that belied the formality of his greeting. "Lady Rhoda, Miss Dorcas," he said with a polite bow. "Thank you for receiving me." "The pleasure is all ours, Your Grace," Lady Rhoda replied, her voice a little too high. She indicated a chair opposite Drusilla, taking up her own chaperoning post like a nervous general. The conversation that followed was a masterpiece of subtext. On the surface, they spoke of the book of poetry he had sent. "I was so pleased you enjoyed the Byron, Miss Dorcas," Benedict began, his eyes holding hers. "I have always found his obsession with caged birds to be a powerful metaphor for the constraints society places upon a vibrant spirit." Drusilla's fingers tightened in her lap. He was speaking directly of her, in a language only she could understand. "Indeed, Your Grace," she replied, choosing her words with care. "But one must wonder if the bird, having never known the sky, is even aware of its cage. Perhaps it mistakes its prison for the whole of the world. Perhaps," he conceded, his expression softening. until the day it hears a song from the outside, a song of the world it was meant for. I imagine such a song would be impossible to ignore. Lady Rhoda, sensing a current of meaning she could not grasp, hastily interjected. Lord Byron is so very dramatic, is he not? My daughters, Rachel and Bertha, are far more fond of the gentle sonnets of Mrs. Browning. A fine choice, Benedict said, without taking his eyes off Drusilla. But it is often in the dramatic that we find the most truth. And so, a pattern was established. 3 times a week the Duke's carriage would roll up the gravel drive. 3 times a week Drusilla would sit opposite him in the drawing-room under the watchful eye of Lady Rhoda. They spoke of philosophy, of art, of politics. With every conversation Drusilla felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. He was not just intelligent, he was perceptive. He did not just listen to her words, he heard the meaning beneath them. After he would leave, her sisters would descend upon her, desperate for every detail. "He looks at you as if you are the only person on earth," Rachel would exclaim. "Does his heart beat for you, Drew?" Bertha would ask, ever the romantic. Drusilla would laugh and deflect, for the truth was too terrifying to admit. She was beginning to fall for him, and it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. She had seen firsthand how love could curdle into jealousy and possession. She could not, would not allow her heart to become another cage. And so she remained guarded, a fortress of witty observations and intellectual debate, never letting him see the vulnerable woman within. Back in London, Benedict paced his library, a storm of frustration brewing inside him. "It is maddening, Benjamin," he said, stopping to face his friend. "I speak with her, but I am speaking to a fortress. Her mind is brilliant, her spirit is undeniable, but she keeps herself locked away. Her father's presence is a poison in that house, even when he is not in the room." Lady Naomi perched elegantly on a chaise lounge, set down her teacup. "Of course she is guarded, Benedict. You are a duke. She is a merchant's daughter with a tyrant for a father. In her world, a man like you is a fantasy, a fleeting dream that could vanish at any moment. She is protecting her heart from what she believes is the inevitable." "The inevitable?" Benedict demanded. "What does she imagine that to be? That you will grow bored?" Naomi said simply. "Or that your family will forbid the match, or that society will mock you until you retreat. She imagines you will leave. Because in her life, it seems the people who are meant to love her most are the ones who cause her the most pain." Benedict fell silent. Naomi's words struck him with the force of a physical blow because they rang with undeniable truth. He had been trying to win a battle of wits when he needed to be fighting a war for her trust. He realized then that he would never break through her walls in that suffocating, chaperoned drawing room. He had to change his strategy. A few days later, Drusilla was permitted a brief walk in the gardens with her sisters. It was one of the few places she felt a sliver of peace, though the estate walls, which had once felt expansive, now seemed to press in on her like a prison. As they were admiring the late-blooming roses, Jennings approached them. "Miss Dorcas, a Mr. Benjamin has called to see your father on a matter of some business." The sisters exchanged a curious glance. Before they could speculate further, a handsome, kind-faced gentleman appeared on the garden path, led by a footman. "Ah, the Mrs. Dorcas, I presume," Benjamin said, bowing with a warm smile. "Your father has been momentarily detained. I hope you do not mind if I admire your gardens while I wait." He engaged them in light, charming conversation for several minutes. Drusilla remained mostly silent, her heart pounding. This was the Duke's friend. His presence here was no coincidence. As he made his farewells, he turned to Rachel, the sister closest to him. "It was a pleasure to meet you all," he said, and as he shook her hand, Drusilla saw a flicker of movement. A small white square passed from his hand to hers, shielded from view. He gave Rachel a brief, meaningful look before turning to leave. The moment he was gone, Rachel and Bertha rushed to Drusilla's side. "He gave me this," Rachel whispered, her hand trembling as she opened it. "It is for you." Drusilla took the note. It was from Benedict. Her name was not on it, but the bold, decisive script was unmistakably his. Her hands shook as she read the words he had written. Drusilla --. I cannot know you as a collection of chaperoned conversations. The woman I met at the ball, the one with fire in her eyes, is the one I must speak with. Meet me at dawn by the old oak at the edge of your estate. I will be waiting. B. She stared at the note, the words blurring through a sudden rush of tears. He was asking the impossible, to meet a man alone, unchaperoned, at dawn. If she were caught, it would mean absolute ruin. Her reputation, her family's name, everything would be destroyed. Her father's cruelty would be nothing compared to the public disgrace. But as she looked at his name, his initial, a secret between them, she knew this was more than a risk. It was a choice. Between the cage she had always known and a terrifying, brilliant glimpse of the sky. The note lay on Drusilla's bedside table, a small square of white in the encroaching twilight, yet it burned with the intensity of a star. Meet me at dawn. The words were a summons, a challenge, a promise. All night she wrestled with the choice, her mind a battlefield. Fear, a cold and familiar companion, whispered of the consequences. The ruin, the disgrace, the cataclysmic fury of her father if she were discovered. It would be the end of everything. But then hope, a new and terrifyingly powerful force, would answer back. It spoke in Benedict's voice, a low and steady murmur that saw past her dress, past her family, and into the very heart of her. I find I cannot rest while that is your reality. For the first time in her life, someone saw her cage and wished to break it. To ignore such a call felt like a betrayal of a self she was only just beginning to discover. An hour before dawn, when the sky was a bruised and starless grey, she slipped into her sister's adjoining room. They awoke instantly, their faces pale with shared anxiety in the candlelight. He has asked me to meet him, Drusilla whispered, holding out the note. Rachel read it first, her eyes widening. Bertha read it over her shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. They did not speak of the danger. They did not speak of the impropriety. They saw only the desperate hope in their sister's eyes. The scullery door, Rachel said immediately, her mind already working. Mrs. Harriet leaves the bolt unlatched for the baker's boy. I will go down first. If I am not back in 5 minutes, it is not safe. I will wait by the landing, Bertha added, her voice a fierce whisper. I will listen for father. He sometimes rises early. If you hear an owl's hoot, it is me. You must turn back. Drusilla looked at them, at their brave, determined faces, and felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought her to tears. In this house of shadows, her sisters were her light. Thank you, she breathed, the words encompassing everything. The journey through the sleeping house was a symphony of terror. Every creak of the ancient floorboards was a gunshot in the silence. Every shadow seemed to hold the hulking figure of her father. But Rachel gave the all-clear, and no owl's hoot came from the landing. Drusilla slipped through the scullery door and into the damp, misty air of the pre-dawn garden, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She ran, her light shawl clutched around her shoulders, her feet silent on the wet grass. The old oak stood at the furthest edge of the estate, a dark and ancient silhouette against the slowly lightening sky. He was already there. Benedict was leaning against the trunk of the great tree, his arms crossed, a solitary figure of patient strength. He was not dressed as a duke, but in the simple, well-cut clothes of a country gentleman. He saw her approach and pushed away from the tree, his expression one of profound relief. You came, he said, his voice husky. It was not a question, but a prayer answered. You left me little choice, your grace, Drusilla replied, her breath catching in her throat. You seem to have a habit of making impossible requests. I have a habit, he corrected, taking a step closer, of pursuing that which is of immeasurable value, and I find I can no longer continue the charade in your drawing room. I did not come to Hertfordshire to discuss poetry, Drusilla. He said her name. Not Miss Dorcas. Drusilla. The sound of it on his lips, in this secret, misty world between night and day, was an intimacy so profound it made her tremble. "Then why did you come?" she whispered, her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "I came for the woman I met at the ball," he said, his gaze intense. "The one with fire in her eyes, who defends her sister and is not afraid to speak the truth. I came because I see the injustice of your situation, and I cannot stand by and do nothing." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "Your father. He is the reason for the black dress. He is the reason for your sadness." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact. And hearing the truth spoken aloud by someone else, by him, was a release so powerful it broke her. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cold cheek. He loved my mother," she began, the words stumbling out. "And now he sees only her ghost when he looks at me, a ghost he has come to hate." "Then he is a fool," Benedict said, his voice soft but laced with steel, "for he is blind to the extraordinary woman standing before him." He gently, tentatively reached out and brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. His touch was electric, a warmth that spread through her entire being. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken feelings. All the witty retorts, all the guarded defenses, they were gone. There was only this man, his sincerity a beacon, his touch a revelation. His eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. He saw her fear, her vulnerability, but he also saw the flicker of a desire that matched his own. Slowly he leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. This was it. The moment she had read about in books but never, ever believed would be hers. The world fell away. There was only the scent of damp earth, the cool morning air, and the warmth of his hand, now cupping her jaw. But as his lips were a mere breath from hers, a lifetime of fear erupted within her. She saw her father's face, contorted with rage. She felt the suffocating weight of his jealousy, a poison that had taught her that a man's affection was not a gift, but a cage. With a small, choked gasp, she pulled back. "I cannot," she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. She was not rejecting him. She was rejecting the terror he could not possibly understand. Benedict froze, his expression a mixture of confusion and hurt. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask, to understand. But a sudden, sharp snap from the nearby woods cut him off. The sound of a dry twig breaking. The sharp crack of a dry twig breaking under a heavy boot echoed from the nearby woods. They both froze, their eyes flying to the source of the sound. A figure was emerging from the trees, a groundskeeper beginning his morning rounds, his dog trotting ahead of him. He had not yet seen them. But in a matter of seconds, he would. Discovery was imminent. Ruin was a single footstep away. The sharp crack of the twig was a gunshot in the fragile dawn. All thought, all emotion, all of the unresolved tension of the almost kiss vanished in a single, ice-cold rush of adrenaline. Benedict reacted instantly. His arm shot out, pulling Drusilla with a firm but gentle strength behind the massive, ancient trunk of the oak tree. He pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes wide and alert, scanning the woods. Drusilla's back was flush against the rough bark, her heart hammering so violently she was certain the whole world could hear it. Benedict was a wall of warmth in front of her, shielding her from view. They were impossibly close, their breaths mingling in the cool morning air. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne and the damp earth. Through a gap in the leaves, they saw him. A groundskeeper, his dog sniffing merrily at the base of a nearby hedge. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man starting a long day's work, blissfully unaware that he was mere feet from a scandal that would bring ruin upon one of England's greatest houses. They stood frozen, barely breathing, as he passed. The seconds stretched into an eternity. He continued down the path, his whistling fading into the chirping of the morning birds until he was gone. The immediate danger had passed, but a new, more complicated tension remained. The raw intimacy of their shared terror lingered in the air, along with the memory of her pulling away from him. Benedict stepped back, giving her space to breathe, though his eyes never left hers. He looked as though he wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but he knew there was no time. The sun was rising, casting long golden fingers of light across the estate. "You must go," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper, "before the house is fully awake." She began, but she did not know what to say. "I'm sorry. I was afraid. Thank you." He seemed to understand. "This is not over, Drusilla," he vowed, his gaze intense. "This changes nothing, except that I now know the lengths I must go to. I will find a way for us to speak freely. I promise you." She could only nod, her throat tight with unspoken emotions. With one last, lingering look, she turned and fled, running back across the dew-kissed lawn, not with the hope she had arrived with, but with the frantic, terrified energy of a fugitive. When she slipped back into her room, Rachel and Bertha were huddled together, their faces pale. "We heard a dog bark," Bertha whispered. "We thought—" "I am safe," Drusilla assured them, leaning against the closed door, her body trembling. "He was there. We were almost seen." She did not tell them about the almost kiss. It was a moment too personal, too confusing to share. It felt like a secret she had to keep even from herself. Later that morning, the family gathered for a tense breakfast. Drusilla kept her eyes on her plate, hoping to appear as unremarkable as possible, but she could feel her father's gaze on her, a heavy, scrutinizing weight. Sir Alister had not missed the dark circles under her eyes or the feverish, high colour in her cheeks. He had been listening all night, a spider in his web, and while he may not have heard her leave, he sensed a change in the atmosphere of his home. "You look flushed this morning, daughter," he commented, his voice dangerously pleasant. "Did you not sleep well? Or did your dreams prove more active than usual?" "I slept perfectly well, father," she replied, her voice steady. "Perhaps it is the prospect of another thrilling day of embroidery that brings such colour to my cheeks." His eyes narrowed at her sarcasm, but he said nothing more. He merely watched her, a predator observing his prey, and Drusilla knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he was planning something. An hour later, in the dim, oppressive quiet of his study, Sir Alister Dorcas confirmed his daughter's fears. He sat at his desk, staring at the damning figures in his account ledgers. Ruin was not a distant threat. It was a wolf at the door. The Duke was a tantalizing solution, but an unpredictable one. Benedict's interest was in Drusilla, the defiant daughter he could not control. It was a situation that grated on his soul. He needed a solution that would solve his financial problems and reassert his absolute authority over his household. His eyes fell upon a letter on his desk, received a week prior. It was from a Mr. Jonas Thorne, a man of 50, whose vast fortune had been built through ruthless, often cruel business practices. Thorne was a widower, socially ambitious, and known to have an eye for very young, beautiful women. In his letter, he had made a blunt inquiry about the prospect of a union with the Dorcas family, having seen Drusilla at a church service some months ago. At the time, Sir Alister had dismissed it. Now it seemed like a stroke of genius. Thorne was a man he understood, a man motivated by simple greed and possession. He was controllable, and he was rich. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across Sir Alister's face. He would solve his money problems and put an end to this romantic nonsense in one fell swoop. He dipped his quill in the ink and began to write his reply to Mr. Thorne. He was setting a trap, and his daughter was the bait. That evening, dinner was a torturous affair. Drusilla, Rachel, and Bertha spoke in quiet tones, while Lady Rhoda made nervous conversation about the weather. Sir Alister remained silent, watching them all with the smug satisfaction of a man who held all the cards. Finally, as the plates were being cleared, he set down his wine glass. "I have some news which concerns this family," he announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. "And you in particular, Drusilla." Drusilla's head snapped up, her heart beginning to pound. "I have long been concerned about your future," he said, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "At your age and with your particular temperament, securing a suitable match has been a challenge. However, I am pleased to announce that I have taken matters into my own hands." He paused, savoring the moment. "I have secured a most advantageous courtship for you, with a man of considerable wealth and maturity. A man who can provide for you, and shall we say, guide your more spirited tendencies. Mr. Jonas Thorn has expressed a formal interest in a union with our family. He will begin calling upon you tomorrow afternoon." The name fell into the room like a stone, shattering the fragile peace. Drusilla stared at him in horror. Mr. Thorn was a lecherous old man, his cruelty in business legendary. She had seen the way he looked at young women, like a wolf assessing a lamb. "No," she whispered. "I beg your pardon?" Sir Alister's smile vanished. "No," Drusilla repeated, her voice gaining strength. "I will not." "You will," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You will receive him. You will be pleasant to him, and you will accept his courtship. He is a man of substance, not some flighty nobleman who amuses himself with merchants' daughters. The Duke is a fantasy. Mr. Thorn is your future." He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked down at her, his eyes cold and hard as chips of ice. "You would do well to accept it. The arrival of Mr. Jonas Thorn was not an event, but an infliction. He was a man whose wealth was announced by the garish shine on his boots and the tightness of his waistcoat over a portly belly. He smelled of stale cigars and cloying cologne, a scent that seemed to stain the very air of the drawing-room. Drusilla endured his first visit with the stoicism of a martyr. She sat beside her stepmother, her hands clenched in her lap, while Mr. Thorn assessed her as if she were a piece of livestock he was considering for purchase. He spoke not to her, but at her, boasting of his factories in the north and the size of his estate, his small, piggy eyes lingering on her face, her neck, her hands. "A fine-looking girl," he boomed to Lady Rhoda, as if Drusilla were not even present. "Quiet, I like that. A wife should be a quiet comfort, an ornament to a man's home." Drusilla's blood ran cold. This was her father's vision for her future, to be a silent ornament in a vulgar man's house. It was a fate worse than death. When he finally departed, leaving the oppressive scent of his presence behind, Rachel and Bertha rushed to her side. "He is a toad, Drew," Rachel declared, her sweet face pinched with disgust. "You cannot marry him," Bertha whispered, her eyes full of tears. "We will not let you." "There is nothing to be done," Drusilla said, her voice hollow. "Father has decreed it." But Lady Rhoda, who had sat through the entire ordeal with a placid expression that concealed a churning heart, knew that something must be done. Her husband's cruelty had finally crossed a line from bitter resentment into monstrous action. That evening, seeing the deadened look in Drusilla's eyes, she resolved to uncover the root of this poison, no matter the cost. Her opportunity came the following afternoon. She sought out Mrs. Harriet, the old family servant who had been with Sir Alister since before his first marriage. She found her in a dusty room in the attic, carefully folding old linens into a cedar chest. "Mrs. Harriet," Lady Rhoda began, her tone gentle, "may I have a word with you? I find myself in need of some clarity." The old woman, her face a roadmap of loyal service, straightened up, her gaze knowing. "If it is about the master and Miss Drusilla, my lady, clarity has been in short supply for many years." "You knew his first wife, did you not? The late Lady Eleanor." "I did," Mrs. Harriet said softly. "I was her personal maid. A sweeter, more vibrant soul you could never hope to meet. She loved life, she loved to laugh, and she loved the master with all her heart." Lady Rhoda leaned against a dusty dress form. "Sir Alister believes she was unfaithful. He speaks of a viscount." Mrs. Harriet let out a weary sigh, a sound that held years of unspoken truth. The viscount. Yes, a charming man who paid her compliments at a ball one evening. The master saw her smile at him, and that was that. A seed of jealousy was planted, my lady, and he watered it every day for the rest of their lives. He became a different man, possessive, suspicious. She looked directly at Lady Rhoda, her eyes full of a fierce, protective loyalty. Lady Eleanor was a good and faithful wife, but she was suffocating. She took up reading, visiting literary societies in London with a cousin, not for a lover, my lady, for air, for a place where she was not watched, not questioned, a place where she could breathe. A piece of the puzzle slotted into place in Lady Rhoda's mind. The books, the secrecy. It was not a tale of infidelity, but a tragedy of suffocation. "Thank you, Mrs. Harriet," she said, her heart aching for the woman she had never met, and for the daughter who was paying the price for her father's delusions. "You have been most helpful." Meanwhile, in London, the news of Mr. Thorne's courtship travelled with the swift and vicious speed of all bad tidings. It reached Duke Benedict via his friend, Benjamin, who had heard it from a gossiping country squire at his club. Benedict received the news in stunned silence. He had been planning his next move, a way to break through Drusilla's defences, but he had never anticipated a move of such calculated cruelty from her father. "Jonas Thorne?" Benedict repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "The man is a vulture. He buys and sells men's souls as if they were commodities. And he intends to have her? It is a business arrangement, nothing more," Benjamin said grimly. "Sir Alistair is in deep financial trouble. Thorne has the coin to save him, and Drusilla is the price. A cold, protective fury unlike anything Benedict had ever known surged through him. The image of Drusilla, her wit, her fire, her profound and fragile spirit, being handed over to a man like Thorne was more than he could bear. It was a sacrilege. "This is not a business arrangement," Benedict declared, his calm demeanour cracking to reveal the steel beneath. "It is a damnation, and I will not allow it." "What do you intend to do?" Lady Naomi asked, her expression serious. "I intend," Benedict replied, his eyes blazing, "to make my intentions so blindingly clear that not even a fool like Sir Alistair Dorcas can mistake them." 3 days later, at the annual county fair, a rare public outing the Dorcas family was obliged to attend, the confrontation occurred. The fair was a lively affair, with villagers and gentry mingling on the green. Sir Alistair was parading his family, forcing Drusilla to walk at the arm of Mr. Thorne, who was preening like a peacock. Drusilla felt numb, a ghost in her own life, enduring the man's possessive grip on her arm and the sympathetic, pitying glances of their neighbours. It was in the midst of this public humiliation that she saw him. Duke Benedict was striding across the green directly towards them, with Benjamin and Lady Naomi a few paces behind. He was the very picture of aristocratic power and righteous indignation. He stopped directly in front of their small party, his height and presence dwarfing Mr. Thorne. He bowed, a gesture of perfect, ice-cold civility. "Sir Alistair." Mr. Thorne, his gaze then moved to Drusilla, and it was filled with a heat and a tenderness that made her heart ache. "Miss Dorcas, you are looking well." "Your Grace," Sir Alistair said, his face mottling with rage at the interruption. "We are enjoying the fair." "So I see," Benedict replied, his eyes still on Drusilla. "But I find I must steal Miss Dorcas away for a moment. I have been meaning to ask her opinion on a new volume of poetry I have acquired. I find her insights invaluable." Before Sir Alistair could protest, Benedict offered his arm to Drusilla. It was a direct, public challenge. To refuse would be to cause an even greater scene. Trembling, Drusilla withdrew her arm from Mr. Thorne's grasp and placed it on the Duke's. "Your Grace," Mr. Thorne blustered, his face turning a deep, apoplectic red. "I believe I am the lady's escort." Benedict turned to him, his expression one of bored dismissal. "Indeed, and I am the Duke of Benedict. I trust you see the distinction." He then looked at Sir Alister, his voice dropping so that only he could hear. "Your games are at an end, sir. Your daughter is not a piece of property to be traded. She is a woman of exceptional character, and she deserves to be treated with honor." He then raised his voice for all the nearby gentry to hear, a clear and ringing declaration. "In fact, my interest in Miss Dorcas and her remarkable mind is so profound, I find I must discuss it with you formally, Sir Alister, at your earliest convenience." The surrounding conversations died. Everyone was staring. He had just publicly declared his intentions. He had thrown down the gauntlet, creating a scandal so delicious it would be the talk of the county for months. He gave Sir Alister a cold, challenging look, leaving the man no room to maneuver. Humiliated, cornered, and shaking with a fury he could not express, Sir Alister Dorcas looked at the man who had just stolen his victory and knew he had no choice. "Tomorrow," he bit out, the word tasting like poison. "At my home, 2:00. The morning of the Duke's formal visit was a study in contrasts. Downstairs, the drawing-room was being aired and polished to within an inch of its life, Lady Rhoda fluttering about with a mixture of nervous excitement and sheer terror. Her entire future, and the futures of her daughters, rested on the next hour. To her, Duke Benedict was not a man. He was salvation in a perfectly tailored coat. Upstairs, Drusilla sat numbly by her window, watching a pair of robins on the lawn. Her sisters, Rachel and Bertha, hovered nearby, their usual cheerful chatter replaced by a hushed, reverent anticipation. "He is going to ask for your hand, Drew," Rachel whispered, her hands clasped together. "I know it. And then Father will have to say yes. He wouldn't dare refuse a duke. And you will be a duchess," Bertha breathed. "And you will leave this house forever, and you will be happy." Drusilla offered a weak smile. "You are both living in a fairy tale. You do not know our father." She had spent the night staring into the darkness, her heart a tangled mess of hope and dread. The Duke's public declaration had been a bold, magnificent gesture, but she knew the landscape of her father's mind. It was a dark and twisted place where logic held no sway, and old wounds festered into poison. She did not dare to hope. Hope was a vulnerability she could not afford. Meanwhile, in his study, Sir Alister Dorcas paced before the cold fireplace. He had been publicly cornered, his authority challenged by a man whose power dwarfed his own. His ambition screamed at him to accept the Duke's proposal. It was a match beyond his wildest dreams, a union that would erase his debts, cement his family's place in society, and make him the envy of every social climber in England. But every time he pictured it, the image was soured. He saw Drusilla, radiant and triumphant, standing beside the Duke, and in his mind's eye, her face would morph into that of her mother, smiling that same radiant, secretive smile she had given the Viscount at the Harrington ball. The thought was a hot poker to his soul. To give his daughter's hand to this man felt like a surrender, a final posthumous victory for the wife he believed had betrayed him. At precisely 2:00, Duke Benedict was announced. He was shown into the drawing-room where Sir Alister, Lady Rhoda, and Drusilla awaited him. Drusilla was instructed to sit beside her mother, a silent observer to the transaction of her own life. Benedict was calm, direct, and impeccably honourable. He dispensed with pleasantries quickly. "Sir Alister," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I will not waste your time with pretense. My admiration for your daughter, Miss Dorcas, is profound. In the short time I have known her, I have found in her a woman of unparalleled intelligence, character, and grace. She is the finest woman I have ever had the honour of knowing." Lady Rhoda's eyes filled with tears of relief. Drusilla's heart began a slow, heavy pounding in her chest. "It is for this reason," Benedict continued, his gaze briefly finding Drusilla's, a silent promise in his eyes, "that I have come today to formally request her hand in marriage." He did not stop there. With deft, elegant phrasing, He alluded to the precariousness of Sir Alistair's financial situation, framing it as a matter of course for a man of his standing to secure his new family's position. He spoke of merging business interests, of dowries and settlements that were, in effect, a rescue package of immense generosity. He was offering Sir Alistair everything he had ever wanted on a silver platter: wealth, security, and a connection to the highest echelons of the aristocracy. It was a perfect proposal. A sensible man, an ambitious man, even a foolish man would have wept with gratitude and accepted on the spot. Lady Rhoda was already doing so, dabbing at her eyes. "Your Grace," she began, her voice trembling with joy, We are overwhelmed." But Sir Alistair was not a sensible man. He was a man consumed by a ghost. He looked away from the Duke and at his daughter. He saw the flicker of hope in her eyes as she looked at Benedict, a soft, vulnerable light he had never seen before. And in that unguarded moment of hope, he saw his wife's smile. He saw the Viscount. He saw the betrayal that had haunted him for 2 decades. The jealousy, hot and absolute, overwhelmed all reason. "Your Grace," Sir Alistair said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You do my family an immense honour, an honour which I must regretfully decline." The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Lady Rhoda let out a small, strangled gasp. Drusilla felt the blood drain from her face. Benedict stared at him, utterly dumbfounded. "Decline," he repeated, as if the word were foreign. "On what grounds?" Sir Alistair rose to his feet, a mask of false paternal concern on his face. "My daughter is of a delicate constitution. Her temperament is ill-suited to the immense pressures and social duties of your world. She is a simple, scholarly girl, Your Grace. Your life would crush her. That is for me and for Miss Dorcas to decide," Benedict replied, his own voice hardening as he rose to face him. "I can assure you I find her temperament to be her greatest asset." "You are mistaken," Sir Alistair said, his eyes glittering with a strange, triumphant madness. "As her father, I know what is best. A union between our families would be unbalanced, and I cannot, in good conscience, agree to it. It was a declaration of war. The flimsy, insulting excuse was so transparently false that it was more offensive than an outright refusal. He was not protecting his daughter. He was caging her." Benedict was stunned, then enraged. He looked from the father's cruel, implacable face to Drusilla's, which was now a pale, emotionless mask. He saw that there was no arguing with this man. It was not a negotiation. It was the decree of a tyrant. "As you wish, sir," Benedict said, his voice clipped and cold. He gave a stiff, formal bow. "Lady Rhoda, Miss Dorcas." He turned to leave. Drusilla knew this was it. This was the final closing of a door she had never even dared to hope would open. Her father had won. He had destroyed her last chance of happiness. And in that moment of absolute despair, a strange, protective instinct rose within her. She could not save herself, but she could still save the Duke. She would not allow this good, honourable man to be dragged down by the scandal and ruin of her family. As he passed her, Benedict paused, leaning in to speak, his voice a low, furious whisper. "Drusilla, this is madness. I will not accept this. I will find a way—" "No," she interrupted, her voice flat and empty. She did not look at him. She stared at a spot on the far wall, her heart turning to stone. "You must, Your Grace. My father has spoken. There is nothing more to be said." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, clutching it to her chest. "Please," she whispered, the word a plea and a command. "Do not call on us again. Leave us to our fate." With that, she turned her back on him. She heard his sharp intake of breath, a sound of profound shock and heartbreak. She felt his presence linger for a moment, a silent, agonizing eternity, before she heard his footsteps recede and the drawing-room door click shut behind him. He was gone, and in the chilling silence of the room, Drusilla Dorcas stood perfectly still, a beautiful statue carved from ice, a sacrifice a secret she would carry to her grave. The moment the front door clicked shut, sealing Duke Benedict out of their lives, the fragile composure of the drawing room shattered. "What have you done?" Lady Rhoda's voice was a choked whisper, all her desperate hopes turning to ash. She stared at her husband as if he were a stranger, a monster she had failed to recognize. Sir Alistair, however, was triumphant. He had faced down a duke, reasserted his absolute authority, and caged the ghost of his wife's perceived betrayal. "I have done what is necessary," he declared, his voice ringing with a mad self-righteousness. "I have saved my daughter from a man I do not trust, from a world that would have destroyed her." Drusilla did not speak. She did not cry. She felt nothing at all. The hope that had flickered within her for the past week had been so utterly extinguished that it had taken all other feeling with it. She was hollow. Without a word, without even a glance at her father, she rose from her chair and walked from the room, her back straight, her steps unnervingly steady. Her silence was a more profound condemnation than any scream. Upstairs, she went not to her own room, but to the window seat at the end of the long hall, a place she had sought for solace since she was a child. She sat and stared out at the indifferent sky, her mind a placid ocean of grief. Rachel and Bertha found her there moments later. They did not speak, but flanked her on the window seat, their young shoulders pressed against hers, and wept the tears that Drusilla could not. Their shared, silent grief was the only comfort in a world that had just been stripped of all light. Miles away, Duke Benedict stormed into the drawing room of his friend's rented house, his face a mask of thunderous disbelief. "He refused," Benedict said, the words tasting like poison. "He looked me in the eye and refused." Benjamin and Naomi, who had been waiting with anxious anticipation, stared at him. "Refused?" Benjamin asked, incredulous. "On what grounds? The man is on the brink of ruin." "He claimed she was of a delicate constitution," Benedict scoffed, pacing the room like a caged lion. "He said his daughter was not fit for my world." He spoke as if he were protecting her, but his eyes, there was a cruelty in them, a madness. He stopped pacing and looked at his friends, his own heartbreak showing through the anger. "And then she told me to leave. She asked me not to call again." That was the blow that had truly wounded him. Not the father's insane refusal, but Drusilla's dismissal. Lady Naomi rose and went to him, her expression full of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "She was not rejecting you, Benedict," she said softly. "She was trying to protect you. A woman living in a cage will not ask a man to join her in it. She will tell him to fly away so he does not have to watch her die." "Then what am I to do?" he asked, his voice raw. "I cannot force my way back in. He will never let me near her again." "You will wait," Naomi said, her voice firm. "You have declared yourself. The father has made his move. The next move must be hers. For now there is nothing more to be done." Benedict sank into a chair, the full weight of his powerlessness crashing down upon him. He, a duke, who could bend the will of Parliament and command the loyalty of thousands, was helpless against the petty tyranny of one broken man. That night, the Dorcas home was silent as a tomb. Sir Alistair had locked himself in his study, drinking heavily to celebrate a victory that felt strangely hollow. The sisters had retired to their rooms, exhausted by grief. Only Lady Rhoda was awake, her mind clear and sharp with a newfound cold resolve. She had been a timid wife, a gentle stepmother, but seeing Drusilla's spirit so utterly crushed had forged something new in her: courage. She walked to the study and entered without knocking. Sir Alistair looked up from his brandy, a scowl on his face. "What is it?" "I have come to ask you a question, husband," she said, her voice even and calm. "Are you so blinded by the past that you are willing to sacrifice your daughter's entire future to soothe a ghost?" "I have protected my daughter," he slurred, slamming his glass down, "from a man who would have tired of her in a month." "You have destroyed her," Lady Rhoda replied, her voice cutting through his drunken haze. "And for what? For a memory? A fantasy of a betrayal that you have nurtured for 2 decades?" She took a step closer. "I spoke with Mrs. Harriet. I know the truth of your first wife." He flinched, as if struck. "You know nothing." "I know she loved you," Lady Rhoda pressed on, relentless. "I know she was a faithful wife who took up reading as a refuge from your suffocating jealousy. And I know about the smile, the one you saw at the Harrington ball. She flaunted herself before him," he roared, rising to his feet. "Did she?" Lady Rhoda's voice remained quiet, but it held the force of a battering ram. "Or was she a young woman trapped in a tedious conversation, looking across the room at the husband she loved, praying he would come and rescue her? You have twisted a moment of desperation into a lifetime of deceit, because your own pride could not bear the thought of another man simply looking at her." She let the words hang in the air. Then she played her final card. "You rage that Drusilla is just like her. You are a fool, Alistair. You are blind. Have you ever truly looked at her? Her mother was vibrant and loved the company of others. Drusilla is a solitary creature who finds her solace in the pages of a book. Her mother was charmingly agreeable. Drusiana is fiercely, unyieldingly principled. Her stubbornness, the iron will that you so despise in her, it is not her mother's. It is yours." He stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. "That refusal to bend when she believes she is in the right," Lady Rhoda continued, her voice softening slightly. "That is you. That is the very quality that made you such a formidable man in business. You look at her, and you see the wife you lost, but you are wrong. I look at her, and I see the man I married. You are not fighting a ghost, Alistair. You have been fighting a mirror." She had said her piece. Without another word, she turned and left him alone in the suffocating silence of his study, the truth of her words echoing around him. Sir Alistair stood frozen, her accusations dismantling the very foundations of his identity. He sank back into his chair, the brandy forgotten. He thought of Drusilla's sharp wit. His wit. Her quiet determination. His determination. He thought of her defiance in the face of his tyranny, the same unbending will he had always prided himself on. The narrative he had constructed over 20 years, the story of a faithless wife and an illegitimate daughter, crumbled into dust. It was a lie born of his own weakness, his own possessive, all-consuming jealousy. And in the service of that lie, he had tormented his own child, his daughter, his brilliant, beautiful, and profoundly broken daughter. A dry, hacking sob tore from his throat. The grief was not for his wife, but for the life he had stolen from his child, for the years of love he had refused to give. He was the monster. He was the ghost. He did not know how long he sat there, but when he finally rose, his steps were unsteady. He walked through the dark, silent house, a man utterly broken by the truth. He climbed the stairs, each step an act of penance, until he reached her door. He stood before it, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. What could he say? What apology could ever be enough? He raised a trembling, age-spotted hand, the same hand that had so often been raised in anger, and hesitated, his knuckles hovering just inches from the wood. The knock on her door was so soft, so hesitant, that for a moment Drusilla thought she had imagined it. It came again, a timid rap of knuckles against the old wood. She had been sitting in the darkness for hours, the world outside her window a distant, meaningless blur. Believing it to be one of her sisters, she rose and opened the door without a word. It was her father. He stood on the threshold, a man she had only ever seen as a figure of iron authority or terrifying rage, and in that moment he was neither. He was simply an old, broken man. His face was ashen, his shoulders slumped, and his eyes, the same eyes that had so often glared at her with cold hatred, were red-rimmed and swimming with a grief so profound it seemed to drown him. Her first instinct was fear, a lifetime of conditioning screaming at her to retreat, to brace for the coming storm. But there was no storm in his expression. There was only ruin. Drusilla. he began, his voice a hoarse, unfamiliar rasp. He seemed to struggle for the words. "May I—" He gestured weakly into the room. Numbly, she stepped aside. He walked into the center of the room and stood there, looking lost. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with 24 years of unspoken pain. "I have been a fool," he said at last, the words tearing from him. "A blind, jealous fool." He finally looked at her, and for the first time in her memory, she saw not the ghost of her mother, but a man looking at his own child. "Your mother. She was a good woman. She loved me. I see that now." Drusilla said nothing. She could not. The foundations of her world, a world built on the unshakable certainty of his hatred, were beginning to crack. "I was so consumed by my own pride, my own imagined slights, that I failed to see what was right in front of me," he continued, his voice cracking. "I failed to see you." He took a shaky step closer. "Every time I looked at you, I saw her face, and I punished you for it. I punished you for her beauty, for her spirit, qualities that I should have cherished in my own daughter." He choked on the word. "My daughter. You are my daughter. You have always been my daughter, and I have been a monster to you." The confession, so raw and absolute, did not bring relief. It brought only a strange, dizzying confusion. This man, the architect of all her pain, was now dismantling his own creation before her eyes. He seemed to see the guardedness in her expression, the thick walls that would not crumble with a single apology. He did not ask for forgiveness. He knew he had not earned it. Instead, his face filled with a new, urgent clarity. "That man," he said, "the Duke, he sees you. He sees the woman I was too blind to. He is a good man. An honorable man." He met her eyes, his own pleading. "What you said to him, telling him to leave, you did it to protect him from me, did you not?" She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I have done this," he whispered, the full weight of his actions crashing down upon him. "I have destroyed your one chance at happiness." He straightened up then, a flicker of the iron will his wife had spoken of returning to him, but this time it was in service of her. "No, I will not allow it. I was wrong to refuse him. If he will still have you, Drusilla, you have my blessing. You have my most profound and heartfelt blessing. Go to him." He turned and walked from the room, leaving her alone in the wreckage of his confession. She stood there for a long time, the silence of the room now filled with the echo of a single, impossible word. "Go." The next morning, Drusilla sat with Rachel and Bertha, the early light streaming into the room, and told them everything. Her sisters listened in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from disbelief to a dawning, brilliant hope. "He said that?" Rachel breathed. "He actually said you were his daughter." "He gave you his blessing," Bertha added, her eyes shining. "Then what are you waiting for? You must go to London at once." Drusilla shook her head, a familiar fear clutching at her heart. "It is too late. I sent him away. I told him never to return. A man like Duke Benedict doesn't beg, and he doesn't wait. He will have moved on. He will have forgotten me." "Forgotten you?" Rachel scoffed, her loyalty fierce. "Drusilla, the man crossed an entire ballroom, ignoring every titled lady in England, to dance with you in a dress made of shame. He has called on you relentlessly. He faced down father in public. Men like that do not simply forget." "But I hurt him," Drusilla whispered, the memory of his shocked, heartbroken face a fresh wound. "I turned my back on him." "You did it to save him," Bertha insisted, taking her hands. "He is intelligent. You said so yourself." "He must know that. You must go to him, Drew. You must tell him you are free. Love like this, it does not come twice in a lifetime. Do not let fear be a greater tyrant than father ever was. Do not let fear be a greater tyrant." The words struck her with the force of a revelation. Her father had surrendered. He had dismantled the walls of her prison, brick by painstaking brick. Now, the only thing keeping her caged was herself. All her life she had been a passive survivor, enduring the cruelty, guarding her heart. But Benedict had seen a fire in her, a strength she was only now beginning to recognize in herself. Love, she realized, was not a passive state. It was an act of courage. A new, terrifying resolve settled over her. She would be courageous. She found her father in his study. He was not drinking, but staring out the window, looking older and smaller than she had ever seen him. He turned as she entered, his expression anxious. "Father," she said, her voice clear and steady, "I am going to London." He did not argue. He did not question. A look of profound, sorrowful relief washed over his face. He simply nodded. "Of course you are." He walked to the bell pull. "I will have the travelling carriage prepared at once. You will take my finest horses." It was the first true act of a father she had ever received from him. The household was thrown into a flurry of activity, but this time it was a flurry of hope. Lady Rhoda, her eyes bright with tears, helped her pack a small valise. Rachel and Bertha fussed over her, choosing her most becoming travelling dress and pressing her shawl. They were not losing a sister. They were launching a champion. As she stood in the entrance hall, ready to depart, Sir Alistair approached her. He did not try to hug her. They were not a family for such things, but he gently took her hand. "Be happy, Drusilla," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is all I ask." She looked at him, at the decades of pain and regret etched onto his face, and knew that their journey to forgiveness would be long, but it had begun. "I will try," she whispered. She climbed into the carriage alone. As it pulled away from the house, she looked back at the faces of her family, her sisters waving frantically, her stepmother weeping with joy, her father standing still as a statue, watching his daughter ride away to a life he had almost destroyed. The carriage turned onto the main road, the road to London. Drusilla faced forward, her hands clenched in her lap. She was riding toward an uncertain future, toward a man whose heart she had broken, with no idea if he would even see her, let alone forgive her. For the first time in her life, she was not running from her past, but racing toward her future, and she was utterly, terrifyingly, magnificently free. The journey to London was a crucible. With every mile that separated Drusilla from her past, she felt a layer of fear and resignation being stripped away, replaced by a terrifying, thrilling resolve. She was no longer a pawn in her father's tragic history, but the author of her own future. This single, defiant act, travelling alone to the city to claim the man she loved, was the most important sentence she had ever written. She arrived at the Duke's London mansion as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the immaculate square. The sheer scale of the building was a testament to his world, a world of power and consequence so far removed from her own. For a moment, her courage faltered. She, Drusilla Dorcas, a merchant's daughter on the brink of ruin, was about to knock on the door of one of the most powerful men in England to offer him her heart. It was madness. But then she remembered the look in his eyes when he'd called her by her name. She remembered his note. "I find I cannot rest while that is your reality." He had not seen her as a merchant's daughter, but as a woman. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, she climbed the stone steps and lifted the heavy brass knocker. The door was opened by a butler so tall and imposing he seemed carved from granite. He looked down his nose at the lone, unannounced woman on the steps, his expression one of profound disapproval. "May I help you, miss?" he inquired, his voice dripping with ice. "My name is Miss Drusilla Dorcas," she said, her voice clear and steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "I must see the Duke. It is a matter of the utmost importance." The butler's eyebrow rose a fraction of an inch. "His Grace is not receiving visitors." "I believe he will receive me," Drusilla insisted, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Please, inform him that I am here." Inside, Duke Benedict was a ghost in his own home. For days he had been in a state of deep, brooding seclusion. The world he had once found merely boring now felt entirely meaningless without the prospect of her in it. He sat in his library, a book open but unread in his lap, ignoring the concerned entreaties of his friends. "You cannot simply hide yourself away, Benedict," Lady Naomi said, her usual witty tone replaced by gentle frustration. "You are allowing that wretched man to win." "He has already won," Benedict replied, his voice flat. "She sent me away." "She was protecting you," Naomi insisted. "Any woman with a shred of sense or compassion would have done the same. A woman in a cage does not ask a man to join her in it." "Then what would you have me do?" he shot back, his composure finally cracking. "Storm the house and drag her away? She asked me to leave, Naomi. Her wishes are the only ones that matter." It was at that moment the granite-faced butler entered, his expression more flustered than Benedict had ever seen it. "Your Grace," the butler began, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Forgive the intrusion. There is a Miss Dorcas here to see you." The world stopped. Benedict stared at his butler, certain he had misheard. Benjamin and Naomi exchanged a look of pure shock. "A Miss Drusilla Dorcas," the butler clarified, as if sensing the disbelief in the room. "She is most insistent." Hope, violent and blinding, surged through Benedict. He shot to his feet. "Where is she?" "I have shown her to the blue reception room, Your Grace." "Bring her to the library," Benedict commanded, his heart hammering in his chest. "Now." To his friends he said simply, "Leave us." They needed no further encouragement, melting from the room with knowing smiles. Drusilla was shown into the magnificent library, the very room where Benedict had first expressed his weariness with the world. He was standing by the fireplace, his back to her, but he turned the moment she entered. The look on his face was a mixture of guarded hope and the profound hurt she had inflicted. "Miss Dorcas," he said, his voice strained. "This is unexpected." This was her moment. She had to be brave. She walked further into the room, her hands clasped before her to still their trembling. "My father. He was mistaken, Your Grace. He was blinded by a past sorrow, and he has seen the truth of it now. He knows he was wrong. He has given me his blessing." She took a shaky breath. "I am free." He said nothing, his expression unreadable as he waited. "I sent you away to protect you," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "To save you from the ruin and the scandal of my family. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it was a mistake." She risked a step closer. "I came to London, Benedict, to tell you that I was wrong to let fear rule me, and that I love you." The confession hung in the air between them, a fragile, precious offering. His carefully constructed walls crumbled to dust. In 2 long strides, he was in front of her, his hands coming up to cup her face as if she were a mirage he feared would vanish. "Drusilla," he breathed, his voice rough with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. He searched her eyes, finding in them not the guarded fortress of their last meeting, but an open, vulnerable, and terrifyingly honest love that mirrored his own. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of desperation and relief, of homecoming and discovery. It was the culmination of every stolen glance, every witty retort, every secret note, every moment of aching proximity. For Drusilla, it was the breaking of a spell, the shattering of a cage, a promise that she was not her mother's ghost, but a living, breathing woman worthy of a fierce and gentle love. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I thought I had lost you," he whispered. "You have found me," she replied, a joyful, tearful laugh bubbling up from her soul. For the next hour, they existed in a blissful bubble of their own creation. They talked, they laughed, he showed her his collection of rare books, and she finally felt the quiet click of a soul settling into its rightful place. It was not the wealth or the title that felt like home, it was the man. He was in the middle of telling her about his plans to build a new library at his country estate when the butler entered again, his expression apologetic. "Your Grace, forgive me. A special courier has just arrived from Hertfordshire. An urgent message for Miss Dorcas. Drusilla took the letter, a cold knot of dread forming in her stomach. It was from her stepmother. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. The note was short, the handwriting frantic. "My dearest Drusilla, I pray this finds you well. A terrible thing has happened. Your father's creditors, hearing of the Duke's refused proposal, have called in all his notes at once. The bailiffs are to arrive tomorrow morning. We are to lose everything. Forgive me, Rhoda." The colour drained from her face. She looked up from the letter, her eyes wide with a familiar, chilling horror. She had just found her perfect, impossible happiness, and in the very same moment, the ruin she had tried to protect him from had not just arrived at their door, it was about to break it down. "Drusilla?" Benedict asked, his smile fading as he saw her expression. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Drusilla?" Benedict's voice was soft, but it cut through the fog of her horror. "What is it? What's wrong?" She couldn't speak. She simply handed him the letter. Her hand was trembling so violently that the paper rattled like dry leaves. He took it, his expression shifting from concern to a hard, focused intensity as he read. The silence in the magnificent library stretched, thick and suffocating. When he finished, he placed the letter on the table and looked not at it, but at her. She saw the familiar walls closing in, the shame of her family's failure, the ruin she had been so desperate to shield him from. Her first instinct was to flee, to push him away, to sever this impossible connection before it was destroyed by the impending collapse of her world. "You see?" she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "This is the ruin I spoke of. The scandal. This is what my family is. You cannot be a part of this. You must not." He listened to her, his expression calm, and when she was finished, he did something she did not expect. He did not offer pity. He did not offer escape. He simply stepped forward, took her hands in his, and held them firmly. "You are right," he said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm. "I cannot be a part of this." He paused, his thumb tracing a soothing circle on her knuckles. "Because we are going to be the end of it." She stared at him, uncomprehending. "This is not ruin, Drusilla," he explained, his gaze unwavering. "This is a problem. It is a set of circumstances brought about by desperate men, and we are going to solve it. Together." The word hung in the air between them. "We." It was a word of such profound partnership, such unconditional support, that it began to silence the screaming panic in her mind. He led her to a chair and then walked to the bell pull, his movements calm and purposeful. "I am not the fantasy you feared I was, Drusilla. I am a man of substance, and my resources are not just for show." Within minutes, his man of business, a sharp-eyed solicitor named Mr. Davies, was shown into the library. Benedict explained the situation with a cold, clear precision that amazed her. He spoke not of a family in crisis, but of a business under siege. "The creditors have called in Sir Alister's notes in unison," Benedict explained. "They sensed weakness after my proposal was delayed. It is a coordinated attack. I want you to find every creditor, Davies. You will buy every last shilling of Sir Alister Dorcas's debt. Use the Pendleton Holding Company. I want the purchases to be anonymous for now. The foreclosure is to be stopped by sunrise." "It will be done, Your Grace," the solicitor said without batting an eye. "Then," Benedict continued, "I want a full analysis of Sir Alister's trade business. I have seen his name in passing. He deals in textiles, does he not? Find his suppliers, his shipping routes, his weaknesses. I suspect he is over-leveraged in the French markets. We will restructure it. There is potential there, if it is managed correctly." He was not simply throwing money at the problem. He was dismantling it, piece by piece, with strategy and intelligence. And more than that, by speaking of her father's business with respect, he was crafting a solution that would not destroy Sir Alister's pride. He was offering not a handout, but a lifeline. They travelled back to Hertfordshire the next morning. Drusilla sat beside Benedict in his comfortable travelling carriage, the world outside flying by in a blur. He did not let her face this alone. When they arrived, the atmosphere at the Dorcas home was bleak and funereal. Jennings, the butler, looked 100 years old. Sir Alister was in his study, a broken man, waiting for the end. Benedict entered the study alone at first, asking Drusilla to wait outside. After a few minutes, he opened the door and beckoned for her to join them. Her father was standing by the window, his back to them, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "Sir Alister," Benedict said, his tone respectful, "I believe we have a mutual interest in the stability of the textile trade." Her father turned slowly, his face etched with shame and confusion. "Your Grace, there is no need for this. You should not be here. My family is undone." "On the contrary," Benedict replied, moving to the desk. "I have spent the night reviewing your accounts. Your network of suppliers is impressive, but your shipping routes are vulnerable to French tariffs. It is a common problem." He laid a piece of paper on the desk. "My own shipping interests in the East are secure and underutilized. I propose a partnership. I will provide a new, stable route for your goods and a significant investment to modernize your mills. In return, my trading company will take a percentage of the profits." Sir Alister stared at him, dumbfounded. It was not charity. It was a business proposition, one that acknowledged his expertise as a merchant and offered him a path to solvency, not a bailout. It was an act of profound and unexpected grace. He looked from the Duke to his daughter, who stood beside him, her expression full of a quiet, steady love. He finally understood. This man was not trying to possess her. He was protecting her, and in doing so, was protecting them all. "Why?" Sir Alister whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Benedict's gaze softened as he looked at Drusilla. "Because, sir," he said simply, "the happiness of your daughter is soon to be my life's most important business interest, and I always protect my investments." For the first time, Sir Alister's eyes met his daughter's, and in them she saw a flicker of the father she had never known, a man humbled, grateful, and finally, proud. In the weeks that followed, a quiet miracle unfolded. The threat of the creditors vanished. Under the guidance of the Duke's expert solicitors, Sir Alister's business was restructured, stabilized, and set on a new path to prosperity. The work seemed to breathe new life into her father, replacing his bitterness with a new, quiet sense of purpose. The atmosphere in the house transformed from one of fear to one of profound relief and quiet joy. With the family's future secure, other happinesses were allowed to bloom. A respectable, kind-faced young baron who had been charmed by Rachel's sweet nature at the infamous ball began to call. Sir Alister, a changed man, welcomed the young man's courtship with a warm and genuine approval that brought tears to Lady Rhoda's eyes. The scandal of the Duke's interest in a merchant's daughter had not disappeared, but it had been utterly eclipsed by the undeniable power of his favour. The Dorcas family was no longer on the fringes of society. They were under the direct and formidable protection of a duke, and society, ever fickle, quickly adjusted its opinion. Drusilla and Benedict were now formally and very publicly engaged. One golden afternoon, they walked together through the very gardens where she had once met him in secret terror. Now she walked openly on his arm, her future duchess, her heart full and at peace. "A quiet wedding, I think," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Here, with just our family. Whatever my duchess desires," he replied, stopping beneath the shade of the old oak tree, the site of their first dangerous meeting. He tilted her chin up, his expression full of a love so deep it still made her breath catch. "Are you happy, Drusilla?" "I am more than happy," she whispered. "I am home," he smiled. "Good. Because my mother's jewels have been locked away for far too long. I was beginning to think they would never see the light of day again. Everything was perfect. The past was healed, the future was bright. Their battles, it seemed, were finally over. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, a perfect day in early June. Sunlight streamed into Drusilla's bedchamber, the same room that had once been her prison, but was now filled with the joyful, bustling energy of her family. Lady Rhoda, her eyes bright with tears, fussed over the placement of a pin, while Rachel and Bertha, resplendent as bridesmaids in soft yellow silk, arranged the gossamer light veil over Drusilla's hair. The wedding was to be a quiet affair at the local parish church, just as she and Benedict had wished. It was a celebration of love, not a performance for society. Just as they were about to descend, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Sir Alistair. He stood on the threshold, looking at his daughter not with the tormented gaze of his past, but with a simple, profound, paternal pride. "You look just like her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. But for the first time, it was not an accusation. It was a loving remembrance. "Your mother would have been so proud of the woman you have become." He stepped forward, holding a small velvet box. "As am I." He opened it to reveal a delicate silver locket engraved with her mother's initials. This was hers. She wore it on her own wedding day. "I want you to have it." Drusilla's fingers trembled as she took it. It was more than a gift. It was an apology, a blessing, an act of healing that closed a wound that had been open for her entire life. She couldn't speak. She simply leaned forward and kissed her father's cheek, a gesture of forgiveness that washed away years of pain. "Be happy, my girl," he whispered. "That is all I have ever truly wanted." Benedict stood at the altar, a man who had commanded armies and advised prime ministers, and found that his hands were not entirely steady. Benjamin stood beside him, offering a quiet, reassuring presence. He had thought he understood what this day meant: a marriage, a partner, the securing of his line. He had been wrong. The church doors opened, and a river of sunlight poured into the nave. And there, on the arm of her father, was Drusilla. She was a vision in ivory satin, her chestnut hair adorned with simple white roses, her mother's locket resting against her throat. She was beautiful, yes, more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen. But as she walked towards him, her amber eyes fixed on his, he saw so much more. He saw the woman who had stood defiant in a dress made of shame. He saw the sharp, brilliant mind that had challenged and delighted him. He saw the fierce loyalty that had made her defend her sister, and the profound courage that had made her ride to London to claim him. He saw the survivor, the scholar, the lover, the friend. He saw the other half of his own soul. As she reached the altar, Sir Alistair placed her hand in his. Benedict's grip was firm, a silent vow. "I will protect you. I will cherish you. I will honor you for all the days of my life." They turned to face the clergyman, but they saw only each other. Their vows were not the rote recitations of an arranged match, but the deeply personal promises of two people who had found each other against all odds. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Benedict turned to his bride, his heart overflowing. He lifted her veil, and with a tenderness that brought tears to Lady Naomi's eyes, he cupped her face in his hands. "My Duchess," he murmured for her ears alone. "My love," she whispered back. Their kiss was not a performance for the crowd. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a seal on a love story that had been forged in shadow and was now, finally, stepping into the brilliant, unending light. A month later, after a peaceful honeymoon touring the serene lakes of Italy, their travelling carriage rolled through the verdant rolling hills of Yorkshire. Westland Castle, Benedict's ancestral home, rose in the distance, its grey stones warmed by the afternoon sun. As they approached, they saw that the road was lined with people. Tenant farmers and their families, villagers and estate staff had all gathered, their faces alight with happiness as they cheered for the arrival of their new Duchess. Drusilla's heart swelled. This was her new home, her new life. Benedict did not lead her to the grand reception hall where the senior staff was waiting. Instead, he took her hand and guided her down a quiet, sunlit corridor to a set of magnificent, unopened double doors. "There is one room in this house that I wanted you to see first," he said, his eyes sparkling with a secret. He opened the doors. Drusilla gasped. Before her was a breathtaking 2-story library with soaring arched windows, a beautiful wrought-iron balcony, and intricately carved wooden walls. But it was empty. The endless shelves, reaching to the frescoed ceiling, held not a single book. "It is magnificent," she breathed, turning to him in confusion. "But where are the books?" "I had my father's old collection moved to the East Wing," he explained, stepping closer. "He was a collector, but not a reader. I did not think you would share his taste for dry political treatises." He took her hands in his. "This library, Drusilla, is yours. I thought we could have the immense pleasure of filling it, together, with stories and poems and philosophies that we both love." Tears of joy welled in her eyes. It was the most romantic, most thoughtful gesture she could possibly imagine. He had not given her a room of jewels or silks. He had given her a world for her mind, her heart, her soul. She threw her arms around his neck, unable to speak, and he held her, laughing softly. That evening, as they stood on a private balcony overlooking the vast, peaceful landscape of their home, Drusilla felt a sense of contentment so profound it seemed to settle in her very bones. She was wearing a gown of soft blush pink, her favorite color, a gift from her husband. The shadows of her past were gone, replaced by the warm, steady light of his love. "Thank you," she said quietly, leaning her head against his chest. "For everything. For seeing me." He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "Drusilla," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. "Do not thank me. Before you, my life was a series of duties, all in shades of grey. My houses were museums, my days were obligations. You brought meaning and colour into my world." He kissed the top of her head. "You, my love, are all the colour I will ever need." She looked up at him, her heart overflowing. She saw in his eyes her past, her present, and her future. She saw a love that was not a cage, but a liberation, a love that had not created her worth, but had simply finally given it the light in which to shine. He was her partner, her champion, her home, and as he lowered his head to kiss her, she knew, with a certainty that reached into the depths of her soul, that this was what happily ever after truly felt like.
A practice game, every word a stone. Then you walked in wearing everything my heart swore to despise. The color I once hated now burns behind my eyes. The color I hated became the hue of my desire. You turned my reason into flame, set my still world on fire. I swore I'd never chase again, but I ran right from the start. The color I hated now holds my heart. You were the man they whispered for, the dream they tried to claim. I never thought your steady gaze would ever call my name. But when you looked at me that night, the ballroom disappeared. And in that shade you once despised, you found what you revered. The color you hated became the hue of your desire. I was the quiet in your storm, now you're the warmth in mine. You swore you'd never chase again, but I felt it from the start. The color you hated now holds me. You swore you'd never chase again, but it's where forever starts. The color you hated now holds your heart. The color you hated